After years of relentless campaigning, the Snyderverse is back and here to stay. That's right, you heard it correctly. Zack Snyder's vision for the DC Universe is not only back, but will continue to unfold in its dark, epic glory. So get ready for a mind-blowing journey into the heart of the Snyderverse, where heroes are flawed, villains are complex, and the stakes are higher than ever before. Don't miss a second of the action as we delve into what the future holds for the Snyderverse and its devoted fanbase. Snyder's superhero work has generated controversy from the beginning. He helmed an expansive, high-budget version of Watchmen in 2009, which received negative reviews and underwhelming box office returns, but gained a devoted following nevertheless. With the disputed Superman origin tale, Man of Steel, which some see as a masterpiece while others disagree with Snyder's portrayal of the hero, he was given the keys to the DC kingdom. But despite its poor success, Batman vs. Superman and Justice League were made possible thanks to it, and Zack Snyder's Justice League was ultimately born from the disastrous Justice League concept. The Snyder Cut's cliffhanger ending had Batman and the Joker working together to battle an insane Superman in the nightmare future. If we're fortunate, we may get to see the director's elaborate ideas for what might happen next come to fruition. The director discussed the likelihood that his Snyderverse ambitions may materialize as a comic book sequel in a recent interview with the Nerd Queens. When asked whether a graphic book adaptation of the Snyderverse may be a possibility, he said, "I'm not going to say exactly who I'd want to pencil it because it could be touchy, but I would really enjoy that if it was a possibility. There was a time when we were going to do that, and then there was sort of a change of desire, I guess." However, Snyder is creating a graphic book for his next two-part space epic, Rebel Moon, for Netflix. Snyder said, "We're doing a graphic novel for Rebel Moon, and I believe we're going to do an animated short. We're going to do a lot more really wild stuff. Everything is planned. I'm not occupied. I love these DC characters, so who knows?" So there's a huge chance here for the fans to see Snyderverse, but in a whole different regalia now, following his recent statement. Meanwhile, recall there was a rumor of a potential sale of the Snyderverse to Netflix that rocked the internet not too long ago. Well, let's address that. The comments of the fans quickly surfaced once James Gunn assumed control of the new DC world. Strong supporters of the Snyderverse, which include movies like Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Justice League, Wonder Woman, and more, had taken to Twitter with the hashtag #SellSnyderverse to Netflix in order to demand that it be saved and sustained. Additionally, by selling certain rights, Snyder would be able to carry out his initial ideas for the DC Universe, which would imply more than just transferring all these films to the streaming service. However, James Gunn, who is in charge of it, had said that neither he nor director Zack Snyder was very interested in the topic. I have to say, this has got to be the wackiest hashtag ever since 1. Netflix hasn't expressed any such interest, although we've discussed other stuff, and 2. Zack hasn't expressed any interest and seems to be happy doing what he's doing. And yes, we two have talked, Gunn said on Twitter. He contacted me to express his support about my choices. He's a great guy. Again, he seems really happy with the massive world building he's doing now. Sadly, it seems like the Snyderverse is almost completely dead, and it is unlikely that Netflix will intervene to rescue the day. Warner Bros. Ultimately caved into criticism and released Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max after a furious fan campaign to finish and release Zack Snyder's original version. Naturally, the supersized edit didn't finish Snyder's DCEU plot, leaving the Nightmare arc and Darkseid Invasion of Earth unfinished. Inevitably, this sparked yet another fan movement calling for more films to complete Zack Snyder's vision. No inclination to cooperate has been shown by Warner Bros. Or the post-merger Warner Bros. Discovery. Any residual aspirations for a Snyderverse continuance are dearer than Dick Grayson, now that James Gunn and Peter Safran are leading a whole new DCU movie series and departing from the old narrative Snyder helped establish. The topic of whether a third party may intervene inevitably arises, with Netflix being the most plausible candidate given its current agreement with director Zack Snyder. Netflix has, sadly, about as much of a chance of reviving the Snyderverse as the Nightmare Timeline Superman has of rescuing Lois Lane due to a pile of impediments. The Spider-Man scenario demonstrates that competing studios can work together to settle their superhero disputes, but an agreement between Netflix and Warner Bros. discovery to revive the DC Snyderverse is harder to pull together. A simple solution was required for Spidey's situation. Sony had Spider-Man, but no franchise, whereas Marvel had a popular brand, but no Spider-Man. Sony and Marvel benefited from one another's lending of that character and his setting. But the scope is far broader when referring to Warner Bros., turning Netflix free on the Snyderverse. Given the monumental scope of Snyder's nightmare, the loan would essentially cover the whole of the DC landscape, or at least a representation of it. The ambiguity of what restoring the Snyderverse would truly entail in terms of practical, legal implications leads to a second issue. Zack Snyder would need to add new narrative lines and characters based on DC's comic universe over maybe numerous films in order to complete his initial DCEU movie plan. In essence, Warner Bros. Would be granting Netflix permission to create a new DC property to compete with its own. That would be like Kevin Feige allowing Jeff Bezos to continue Fox's X-Men film series on Amazon Prime, despite the MCU having its own plans for Professor X and company in the future. The only option would be for Warner Bros. To hit Netflix with so many conditions and limitations that the process of reviving the Snyderverse is rendered completely pointless. Conflicting interests between Warner Bros. And any hypothetical third party who would restore the Snyderverse are the root of the issue. It might be plausible for Netflix to strike a deal to borrow a single DC character from Warner Bros. That the studio has no active plans for, but Warner Bros. Sees no reason to consider a deal for the Snyderverse, which features a large cast of Justice League heroes and no clear endpoint. Netflix would definitely be excited by the potential of producing original films starring well-known DC characters like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but in practice, it's questionable if the advantages of streaming services would outweigh the expense. Given that the Snyderverse contract puts its own DC movie series in direct competition, the amount of money required to get Warner Bros. To comply would be outrageous. Future Snyderverse Netflix movies would thus easily surpass the Gray Man's current record budget for an original film on Netflix if an agreement could be made. It is challenging to determine how successful the Snyderverse revival would need to be in order to make back the expenses now that Netflix has added an advertising tier to its membership business. To suggest the threshold would be almost hard to clear is sufficient. Undoubtedly, there is a wave of support for the Snyderverse, but it's very speculative whether that love could ever convert into a successful endeavor for Netflix. Snyder's original films like Army of the Dead and Rebel Moon would already be luring many of his fans to the platform, but general viewers are unlikely to be attracted by what may be seen as a simple Justice League sequel. Zack Snyder's tale to be continued would be terrible for DCU's artist worth, but Warner Bros. Permitting the Snyderverse to play out at a competing studio stinks of poor business. Warner Bros. Has signaled its plan to start over totally by appointing James Gunn and Peter Safran as co-heads of DC Studios. Gunn has confirmed that a schedule of 8 to 10 years has been prepared. Major changes are being made, including the dismissal of Henry Cavill as Superman, the cancellation of Wonder Woman 3 by Patty Jenkins, and the premature end of the Black Adam series. Those attempts to get beyond the problematic DCEU years would be in vain if Netflix intervened to maintain the Snyderverse. Running 2 DC movie franchises simultaneously, each with its own Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc., could only ever end in one series' value being diminished relative to the other. The DCU would probably do badly in a head-to-head matchup, also since the property is far less known than its Snyderverse counterpart. No newcomer can genuinely succeed if its predecessor refuses to make way, and the DCU may be doomed before it ever has a chance at success if it's forced to compete with the Snyderverse. Well, the good thing is Netflix won't be taking over the Snyderverse anymore, and that's worth every form of celebration that comes about it. With Zack Snyder's recent affirmation, we're sure in line to witness another form of the hit series, so stay tuned as we'll bring you more interesting videos about the Snyderverse as they unfold. Until next time, it'll be goodbye.